Hello and welcome. My name is Peggy Agouris and I am the provost at William & Mary. I want to thank you for being here tonight and welcome you to the kickoff event for this year's One Book, One Community program. This is a program that is brought to you by William & Mary and the Williamsburg Regional Library. I'm assuming that you have figured as much by now. One Book, One Community is an initiative that encourages our community to come together and have a shared reading experience. This year's book selection is Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinenberg. In his book, the author reminds us that democracy is fortified by people coexisting together in public, and that public spaces, like our libraries and museums, can produce community, belonging, and unity. This book ties very nicely with William & Mary's new initiative, what we call the Democracy Initiative, an initiative that was born on January 7 of last year. The initiative examines how social infrastructure can address inequality, polarization, and civic life. At William & Mary, we are striving to model democratic ideals, rekindle civil discourse, convene different perspectives and viewpoints, and advance democratic ideals. All this, not just in the classroom or with our students, but with the community. Today's discussion will be moderated by Barbara Hamm Lee, executive producer and host of WHRO's radio show Another View. We're very fortunate to have her with us tonight. Barbara is an award-winning journalist, facilitator, and owner of Sharing Info LLC, a media and communications consulting company. Barbara specializes in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice programming and leadership training for government agencies, schools, nonprofits, and corporations seeking racial, cultural change. She's very involved in her community, serving as a board member for the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities and the National Center for the Prevention of Community Violence. Please join me in welcoming Barbara Hamm Lee and our panelists for today's talk. Barbara.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. You know, it is really nice to, let's see, I've been to the grocery store, the studio, and my Zoom computer, and that's about it for a long time. So it's nice to be out in public, and thank you so very much for joining us this evening. As it was said, this is the first of many activities this month surrounding the book Palaces for the People, How Social Infrastructure Can Help Fight Inequality, Polarization, and the Decline of Civic Life. Now, we have an outstanding panel to start our discussion, but this is a community conversation. This is not just you all listening to us. So we want to hear from you. So think about your questions or comments that you have surrounding the book. How many of you read the book thus far? Okay, all right. You still got time. If you haven't had a chance to read it yet, you still have time. We will take questions after we've had a chance to hear from the leadership of some of the Palaces for the People right here in Virginia. So let's meet our panelists, starting with Carrie Cooper. Carrie Cooper was appointed Dean of University Libraries at William & Mary in 2011. During her time with the university, she has overseen exciting renovations to the university's main library, developed innovative faculty collaborations, and raised over $22 million for university libraries. Prior to coming to William & Mary, Carrie served as the Dean of Libraries at Eastern Kentucky University. She previously served as Libraries Coordinator of Research and Instruction. Before joining EKU, she worked as an elementary school teacher and a high school librarian. A native of Florida, Carrie received her bachelor's degree in elementary education from Florida State University and her master's degree in Library and Information Services from the University of Southern Mississippi. She is currently pursuing her doctoral degree in Educational Policy, Planning, and Leadership at William & Mary. Please welcome Carrie. Cliff Fleet is the president and CEO and the Colin G. and Nancy N. Campbell Distinguished Presidential Chair at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. A corporate executive, teacher, community volunteer, board member, and consultant, he has enjoyed a broad and deep career with leadership roles across a variety of disciplines and organizational sizes. In addition to his role at Colonial Williamsburg, Cliff teaches business at the College William and Mary and is a board member of the William and Mary Foundation, the Omohundro Institute, and the Virginia Business Higher Education Council. Previously, Cliff served as president of the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation and as president and CEO of several companies. A native of Virginia, Cliff earned 4 academic degrees from William and Mary, including graduate degrees in history, business administration, and law. Please welcome Cliff Fleet. With a career spanning over 35 years, Christy Coleman has served as the chief executive officer of some of the nation's most prominent museums. She's a tireless advocate for the power of museums, narrative correction, diversity, and inclusiveness. Christy is an innovator and leader in the museum field, having held leadership roles at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and the American Civil War Museum. She now serves as the executive director of the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation. She's written numerous articles. She's an accomplished screenwriter, public speaker, and has appeared on several national news and history programs. She served as the historical consultant for the award-winning film Harriet and Showtime's Good Lord Bird. She's also appeared in award-winning documentaries Lincoln, Grant, Neutral Ground, and When the Monuments Came Down. Christy is the recipient of numerous awards for her decades of impact, including 3 honorary doctorates. In 2018, Time magazine named her one of the 31 people changing the South. And in 2019, Worth magazine named her one of 29 women changing the world. Please welcome Christy Coleman. And our final panelist for this evening, Betsy Fowler, is the director of the Williamsburg Regional Library. She has been a library advocate, consultant, and public library administrator for over 3 decades, serving as the director of library and research services for the city of Chesapeake and as the coordinator of branch services for the Central Rappahannock Regional Library. Betsy was named Virginia Library Staff Person of the Year, received the Virginia Library Public Relations Award and the Chesapeake City Managers Award. In 2012, she was selected by the U.S. Department of State as a professional emissary to work with Greek libraries. Betsy earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in art history, and honors in historic preservation from the University of Mary Washington, and a Master's of Science in Library Science from the Catholic University of America. Please welcome Betsy Fowler. See, in radio, I would have told my audio guy, play some music. Good evening.
Hi.
How you guys doing?
Hello.
All right. All right. How many of you have read the book?
Very
Okay, I will admit also, I was speed reading over the weekend. I will admit. Okay, so in Palaces for the People, Eric Kleinenberg suggests that the future of democratic societies rests not simply on shared values, but on shared spaces. The libraries, museums, childcare centers, churches, and parks, where crucial conversations and connections are formed. Do you agree with this statement? If you do, why? If you don't, why not? And let's start with Carrie.
I do agree with Mr. Kleinenberg. I am always amazed as a library director how much time I spend thinking about the space and how to make sure that faculty and students still want to come and be a part of what we have there. We've made it so convenient for people to stay in their offices, to get collections online. But I do think people want to be together and they want to learn together. So I think libraries, it's really important to have a place where people can be curious and pursue knowledge. And I think they can do that alone in a library, or I think they can do that together with other people. But really, the space is really important.
Okay. What about from a museum perspective, Christy?
Well, when you consider that virtually every study, every 3 or 4 years, the Pew Research Center puts out a study of America's most trusted entities. And libraries are always ranked at number 1, and museums are always ranked at number 2. So they do have an important role in public life. We have to be mindful, though, that museums are, in the US anyway, are relatively new concepts, the way that we understand them now. Before that, they were principally curiosity closets, right, where you just had this compilation of stuff. And it was a carryover, actually, from expositions and sort of like the World Expo kind of things, and they, as much as they became a part of society, particularly here in the U.S., they, unlike other parts of the world, with the exception of the Smithsonian, most of our museums are private enterprises, right? Which makes them vastly different. They were what someone else deemed important to collect and or preserve. And we saw a massive uptick in the numbers of our museums during the robber baron era, right? So, it's an interesting place to be born from, and in terms of what museums do now. But we still have work to do.
Okay. What about you, Betsy?
I was struck when I was rereading the book very recently, last night, like you, that we intuitively understand this, but somehow without even framing it as articulately as he did. Because we've tried to animate City Square and provide seating outside. We've made a new children's space that has lots of seating so parents can talk and meet each other while the children are playing. And there's a lot of interactive toys and exhibits for them to play with. So we have film festivals, and now we're setting out seating and coffee afterwards so seniors can connect in the afternoon. So I think we really understand that this is a place of connection, the public library is, that people come here, and a lot of people are lonely, and a lot of people are really isolated. And we really worked hard to stay open for most of the pandemic because we knew that people needed us, and that we were a place of refuge and an anchor.
Cliff, didn't mean to make you laugh, but you're the only guy up here.
I noticed that when I was backstage. I was the only. So I had the privilege, obviously, of listening to some very eloquent answers to the questions. So I'll take a little bit of a different tactic. I think, first of all, we have to focus on what are the traits that make us human, and one of those things is connecting with other people. That is part of the human condition, I think, for most people, to form connections with others. And as much as we talk about the online space, I think that the in-person or physical space is what really drives us as humans. In addition to that, the predication of having a functioning, healthy society involves us understanding how to interact with each other and understanding what the base learning is we need to know to be responsible Americans, responsible citizens, and things like that. And so creating spaces where people can interact with others that are not like them actually builds trust and increases the connections that are in society. And when we think about libraries as repositories of knowledge, and think about museums, and I agree wholeheartedly with Christy's quick overview of how they've evolved over time. We have important roles to play in not only creating the spaces necessary for people to connect, but also in delivering educational programming. I think that's necessary for people to have a base understanding about what it means to function and live and operate here. That was actually recognized early on in the founding of our nation. Many of the early papers and things going back and forth talked about the need to create a national university that would educate people about what it meant to be, and form connections between the colonies and disparate people to make sure that they united and bonded with each other.
What it meant to be civil.
Yeah, so what it meant to be civil, that's right, and overcome the differences and things. So it's very much, I guess, obvious, but it's also really hard work, I think, for all of us to play those important roles.
So let me play devil's advocate for a little bit, because it is easy to, well, not easy, but I understand about setting the space. But my question is, how do you then still get people to interact? Because don't we tend to go places where we feel comfortable? And so therefore, if we only go places where we are comfortable, are we interacting with all those disparate people that we keep talking about? Who wants to start? Christy's smiling, so I'm going to her.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, right? I mean, where do you feel comfortable? And for a very long time, our public spaces, for most of our nation's history, our public spaces were not designed for everyone. Our public spaces were designed to be segregated and separate. Our public spaces reinforced certain ideas and ideals in those spaces. So, for example, for Black communities, as an example, that often were not allowed in the libraries or only allowed on certain days, would rely on school libraries, the segregated school libraries, which often did not have the latest books or what have you, but they had things that the community could go to. They became community centers. There's also the Black church. As a matter of fact, I was talking to one of you backstage about how I remember, as I grew up in Williamsburg, I'm a Williamsburg girl, and this theater was a big part of also my church experience, because every February on Sundays at 3 o'clock, we would have a program for the community, the Black community, basically, that was a Black history program. Music and poetry and dance and any number of things that were held in this library space. And so that connective tissue, I think, is really, really critical, because museum going as a thing was not something that our communities often did, because those experiences often didn't include us, and if they did, they were insulting and not very real in terms of the experience. And sometimes there were cost barriers. And even today, that legacy continues, with the exception of ethnic-specific institutions or institutions that have made it a concerted and deep effort to change and to reconstruct and to correct the narratives that they do. For the most part, our museums, the places that we think of as the grand institutions, have less than 10% of the audiences that go there are people of color. And that's everybody, not just Black people. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Less than 10%, because these were not spaces that have traditionally been welcoming, either by the way they functioned, the way again, what they displayed, how they displayed, etc. So it's a long answer. I got to stop doing that. But I'm a public historian, so my brain is like, you've got to give context to everything. But yeah, I mean, this is the work. And it's nice to see that those things are changing to a certain degree, but it's really hard, consistent work. It really is. It's generational work. It's not, let's see what new program we can do this year.
Betsy, you talked about having the benches where people could, the parents could sit and watch their kids play, and having the coffee and tea for seniors and so forth. Do you notice that there is an actual mixing, not only racial, but gender, socioeconomic? Are you seeing that change, or are you seeing people being pretty homogenous?
When I first came to Williamsburg to the library, someone said to me, the library here is the one place where you see everybody almost in the community. You see all kinds of people here, and I really like it for that reason, because it's this great cross section. And we do see it when we're working hard to engage people, like with the new children's room. We see lots of generations. We see lots of people who are not traditional library users, but we're making a big effort to try to be relevant and to try to reach out. And I think what we've become, libraries have always thought that we were leveling the playing field, that we were democratic, that we were inherently respectful and welcoming of everyone, but I think it's forefront in our minds now that we have to do more than that. That we really have to fling the doors open as broadly as possible inside the buildings and outside the buildings. So we're really taking, it's not just the space of inside the library, we're really going out into the community, we're collaborating with other entities, we're using their spaces, we're using outside spaces and neighborhoods to hold programs and to bring things to people that may not have historically used the library or felt welcome in the library. So I think we have a long way to go, but we're at least more aware and more intentional and we're putting more resources, a lot more resources into it.
Carrie, you were in Chesapeake, right?
No, I was in Florida before I was in Virginia. As a high school librarian, as a public school teacher,
okay.
and then in Kentucky. She was in Chesapeake.
My mistake.
No.
But again, since you're in the library space, though, I mean, do you see it the same way that Betsy does?
Well, it's interesting. As an academic library, we have a very narrow lens of who we serve a lot of times. So, we're serving our students, we're serving our faculty. But in the last decade, we've worked really hard to make sure that the people in our community know that our library is for them too, because we're a public institution, we're a public university. So Special Collections Research Center is a really nice entry point because people in the community are always intrigued and interested in the historical documents that we have. We're not a museum. Things are, really deep in the bowels of the building, but we work hard to bring out things that we curate for specific community groups. We've done a lot of that. And we have recently improved the parking problem behind the library, so it's all visitor parking. I think actually
Don't ask her about parking.
They get They started it with the app on the phone. We finally talked our campus into putting the app on the phone so that people from the community will come into the library. But last night we had a program on Black Greek letter organizations and the history of those organizations. We had 150 people from the community attend. It was fantastic.
But let me ask you a question. Was it diverse?
No, it was mostly Black.
See,
Yeah.
and that, to my point,
Yeah.
again, if we're trying to
Yep.
create, I just think that Kleinenberg, my personal perspective here, was a little idealistic in his saying that, create the public space and they will come.
Yeah.
When we, we put together programs, it's great that they came. But do you ever ask yourself, well, how come no white people came?
We had white people.
Okay.
We did have white people.
Okay.
Yeah, we did have white people.
Well, that's why I was asking if it was
I will say a
diverse,
lot of them were library staff because so many of them worked on the exhibit, but we did have students
From
that came.
Okay.
We did have some students there. We did have alumni there. But the exhibit will stay up through the entire semester. And, our students are, seeing parts of our campus that they've not seen before because the exhibit's up and it's a very visible part of the library. It's not just in one corner, it's throughout the most popular area of the building. So we celebrated last night, but the exhibit stays for a long time and we'll continue to think of ways to bring people from our community in our building. But you're right, you capture the imagination and the attention of the people who probably would come anyway.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get diverse perspectives in the room. It's true.
I mean, look at our audience. This is and no, this is not disparaging at all. It's the point of, you know, how do you create programming? How do you create opportunities that everybody is going to want to come to? Or is that important, Cliff? Maybe it's not important.
No, I think it's very important. I think it's very important. We're spending a lot of time right now deeply thinking about where do we take our programming, which is something, you know, good institutions need to do every so often. And so I was complimenting Christy backstage, because as I went back and read, you know, the evolution of educational programming at CW, probably no one person has influenced where we are today more than that woman sitting on the other side of the dais over there. So, because her name is all over it. So we are doing, thanks to her work and the work of many others that have come behind her, I think some very good work. But our audience hasn't shifted and moved in the way I think that we would like it to, in terms of what we're doing. So we have a lot of work to do in that space. Are we seeing some, I'll say, glimmers of hope or movement in there? I think, yeah, if you stand out and you look, you are definitely seeing it, particularly when you think about the increasing multicultural nation of our society. But it's not moving as fast as I would like it to. Because having more people come and mix with each other, I think, is central to the preservation of our society.
Yeah. One of the things that we struggle with at WHRO, I'm assuming, hopefully you all know, we do a series called Race, Let's Talk About It, and we go out into the community and hold community conversations. And my boss, Bert Schmidt, the president and CEO, and I were talking one day, and he was like, you know, what do we have to do to get the people who listen to WNIS come to our conversations? Because we're talking to each other. I mean, we're the same folks are talking to each other. If the goal of the public space, of the area where all people can gather and have civil discourse, is all the same people having that civil discourse, you know, are we making any progress? And that's just a frustration that I know we deal with in trying to engage. I told them we should run promos on the station, you know, and see if we can get people to come out. But we don't seem to want to talk to one another. How do you deal with, if you have had to deal with conflict of people who have come to your spaces, who may not, Christy, for example, agree with the history that is presented or whatever?
So, I mean, there are two big groups of museum visitors. There's the traditionalists, and then there's something called the noetics. And there are a few in the middle, right? And this isn't just a simple conservative liberal. That's not what we're talking about here. Traditionalists are people who come to our historic sites, on one hand, looking for, they all come for validation. Let's start there. Everybody's coming to the museum for a form of validation of their understanding of the past. The traditionalists come for a sense of pride. In their learning, they want to leave the space feeling good about their community, their nation, whatever. The noetic comes for critique. It doesn't mean they don't love, but they come for critique. They want deeper, nuanced understanding about something. And they get angry, both can get angry, if they come into a space and it's not exactly what they expect. And so we've seen this play out, probably more so recently, because we're in round 3 of the culture wars. And so we see visitors, we see, you know, for example, at our site, you know, one of the things that we did shortly after I arrived at JYF was we renamed the Powhatan Indian Village Paspahegh Town. And the reason why we did that is that the whole area was recreated based off of archaeology of Paspahegh. So it made sense to give a real name since we had recreated. I mean, we were calling it James Fort, so why would we not call this place Paspahegh, right? So we made this change. And there were people who were really angry about that, right? I mean, they were angry that we were being politically correct and started asking us questions like, well, what are you gonna do next? Start doing land acknowledgements and It was really fascinating. Now, mind you, I don't tend to get really angry in space like that. I find it fascinating how quickly people can show themselves. Subsequently, we've also had visitors who come and they say, well, wait a minute, wasn't Jamestown the place where the first Africans in British North America came? Where are they? Because I don't see anything out here that talks about black people at all. What are y'all doing? Hiding the truth, right? And it's less than satisfying to say, well, if you go in the galleries, there's lots of information about those Central West Africans. But it's about physical space, and it's also about how an institution markets itself and the stories that it markets. And all due respect to my friend, because he and I have chatted a little bit about this in the past. One of the things that used to crack me up, I was like, well, you know, part of the reason why people don't know about all the amazing things that happened at Colonial Williamsburg for so long was because whenever you saw a commercial for Colonial Williamsburg, it was just fifers and drummers going down the street.
Yeah.
We really didn't, as an institution, strive to show the visitors these really complex things that were taking place on the ground. So needless to say, people would come, you know, when I was still working there, they would come and they would be really put off. And when I became director of public history for Colonial Williamsburg, which meant all the tours and programs, I was responsible for the content, right? I said one simple thing that I want everybody to do, whether you're in a trade shop, whether you're in just one simple thing that we want you to do. And that is to let every single visitor that you encounter know that every other face they would have seen on the streets of Williamsburg on the eve of the Revolution was black. That one thing. And do you know how hard that was? But it was a fact. 52%. 52. Every other face. So it's that kind of thing. I meing, there's and we still have that with us. While the needle has absolutely moved, there is still this thing between what traditionalists want. I mean, this desire, again, to feel good about self and community, where you got this other person who's like, we got all kinds of issues and problems historically, how did we get here? So you see what I'm saying? How it's a different desire to look through that lens, and they will clash sometimes on our sites, and we get this pushback that somehow being either critical or really wanting to delve into the nitty-gritty or the difficult elements of history is somehow going to break us, right? Versus if we even dare for a moment to say, yeah, I love my country, that is somehow brainwashing. I mean, it's not an either or, and we're so, right now in particular, we are so,
one side or the other.
It's one side or the other. And it really, so I think when we're doing our job well, now here's the positive. When we do our job well in these spaces, and we're able to bring both of those elements together around an idea that at first they may recoil to, and you engage in that conversation through open dialogue or through the narrative. People love stories. And when you can weave a compelling story that's based in our shared history, it's amazing what the responses are. Just one last thing, and then I won't say another word, I promise. I'm gonna give you an example of what I mean.
I do have something.
As a nation, as a young nation, it was really important for us to kind of coalesce around figures and personalities, right? So George Washington was our dude, you know? And we created myths around George. He could never tell a lie, right? He chopped down a cherry tree, right? He had wooden teeth. None of that's true. So when we have this conversation about George, right, and we say, well, no, his teeth weren't wooden. In fact, he paid French dentists quite a bit for teeth that were made of ivory and human teeth. And people go, wait a minute, what? Human teeth? Yeah, from his slaves. His false teeth were human teeth and ivory that he got from his slaves. So imagine having so much control over another human being that every part of them was at your disposal. What does that say about our early founding and the way we perceived each other? And that moment for people, the noetics are like, I knew it was something, right? And the traditionalists are like, but he was still a good dude, right? Right? And you go, the beautiful thing is, we aren't either or. We are complex human beings, and when we stop expecting our history to be, our shared history to be one thing or another, or that we suppress things because we don't like it, that's where, to me, that's where the problem is. That's what I see as consistently the issue in the United States, is that we have never fully addressed our sins, and there are many. We've never fully addressed that. We've never looked at that so we could stop doing the ththings that we used to do that cause pain and discomfort and discord and all of those other things. You sweep it under the rug, like, the drunk uncle. Yeah, he was drunk. Yeah, he used to get mean, but God, we loved him. Great. So let's talk about alcoholism. But we don't choose to do that. I use this analogy a lot because people seem to get it, and that's my point. Storytelling helps you get what we're talking about.
I'll just tell one quick story to build on what she said. So it's a story with two parts. So every Monday, Amy knows this, Amy Ritchie's out there as our community affairs manager, I get what I call love letters. They're on my desk.
Love letters.
Half of them are about parking, the other half are about something we've done.
I think there's something about parking going on right here.
Yeah, a lot of letters about parking. So invariably, somebody didn't like their dinner, or somebody didn't like a program, or whatever the case may be. I don't get many letters, though, from people reacting to some of our more provocative programming. And we do some pretty provocative programming for people. Christy knows. And in fact, what I've observed, and I'll say this, we have what would be defined as a fairly conservative donor base, by and large. We have a very large donor base, but I'll use one story to illuminate this, what we're sensing. So we had a donor meeting last fall. We had several hundred people come in. It was, nice dinner, and this couple was leaving early. They were going back to Texas to go meet with George Bush the next day. Okay, so we know which side of the political aisle he's on. Okay, the entire dinner, he was all over me to go faster with Black history. Okay, faster, because it was so important to correct the national narrative.
Wow, progress.
Okay, right. And that is actually more consistent with what we're hearing from our principal donors now. How can you go faster?
Well, you bring up a really good point, because I was going to talk about, or ask you all about the people who create the spaces,
right?
And how that plays into how those spaces are ultimately utilized, for all the rest of us. I mean, in other words, is it more of a socioeconomic thing. Let me give you an example. So in the book, Kleinenberg talks about in New York how he was at the library down on the East End, I think, and they were waiting for the doors to open, and there were homeless, and there were parents, and there were business people, and there were elderly people, and he was like, oh, this is great, they're all together. But I'm curious from the two of you, when the homeless person comes and hangs out because it's cold outside, are they interacting with people, or is this just another opportunity for them to still be isolated, even though they're in a space where supposedly people are interacting with one another? Who wants to start?
We probably have more homeless than swim
You do.
libraries.
You do. I think you should take that one.
Well, from your other experience too, you can do from both.
Right. I think you're right. They're not interacting. They're usually coming in. We have people who come in regularly. They come in for a while every day, and then they disappear, and we don't see them again. Frequently to use the computers, frequently to take shelter. There's not a lot of interaction, and some of them are struggling with mental health issues and addiction issues. I think the staff tries to be compassionate, but also, kind of neutral and not intervene unless it's necessary. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the challenge of being in a public library is a lot of different types of people are coexisting in a relatively small space. If you take the adult area of the Williamsburg Regional Library, we have people writing books, we have scholars, we have students, we have people who don't have shelter, and I think we have to give real kudos to the public librarians who try to manage all these people and try to make everyone coexist, more or less.
The reason I'm smiling is because I'm thinking back to, when I was growing up, you went to the library. It was a big deal. I remember very vividly when I got to the 5th grade in Baltimore, you were allowed to take out 10 books. And,
right.
And I had my library card, and I would get my 10 books and stack them up, and I'd set a bowl of apples in front of me because I was an avid reader, and just munch on apples and read like crazy,
Right.
Loved it. But I never thought, Carrie, of the library being a place to go interact or meet people. It was to go get books and come out, go into those stories, but not necessarily engaging in the library. The library, you're supposed to be quiet.
Yeah, that's not the library. It's William and Mary. I mean, it's a really noisy place, and there's lots of collaborative spaces. So it has evolved. It's very social at William and Mary, and from what I'm seeing from my colleagues who are running libraries, academic libraries across the country, it's that way a lot of places. I mean, it depends on, I think, how your campus is built, whether you have a student union, but it is a very intellectual and a social space. And we're also thinking about knowledge, the creation of knowledge, right? We're talking about oral histories. We have our first oral historian, actually our second oral historian right now, but who gets to create knowledge, who gets to tell stories, and whose truth is it? And I think one important thing that academic research libraries do is we make sure that we have collections that are responsive to what we're teaching in the classroom, what faculty want to research. We're thinking a lot about the makeup of the authors whose books we're buying. You need to make sure your collections are rich, and they represent lots of perspectives. And I can tell you that most libraries, when they opened in when Earl Greg Swem came to be the librarian in 1920 to 1944, he was not thinking about the Black perspective. He wasn't. He wasn't thinking ahead to the types of things that we would want to make everybody feel welcome. That was not what he was doing. So we're missing a lot of things in history, and we're missing, I think we're trying to make up for a lot of that by being very intentional right now with the things that we are building in terms of going back and filling in gaps.
So it's important for our public spaces, I'm asking the question, not making the statement, is it important then for our public spaces to evolve with the rest of society, or are public spaces supposed to lead? I'll take one of y'all start. Go ahead, Miss Christy. No,
Cliff,
Cliff,
No,
go
probably.
ahead. Go ahead, Cliff.
I think it is probably a bit of both in terms of how you do this. I think we have a responsibility to lead, to make a difference. For example, museums are places where people gather, and you need to make sure that they're welcoming, that all people feel that they can find, feel comfortable walking into that environment and feel like, even if there's not people around them, that they feel like this is a place that is safe for me to be. Mm-hmm. And the more diverse people that we can reach and do that, the better, obviously, we're fulfilling our mission. To do that work, though, you will have to lead in figuring out how do you do that, how do you evolve, where is society going, and how do you get there. It also, though, you have to keep pace, because if you get too far ahead and you push everybody away, then you're not fulfilling your job. So that's why I say it's a little bit of both.
So you got to balance it out.
You have to balance that, because you want to lead, but it's like with leadership. If you lead too far, too fast, you're going to find yourself alone.
So
and then you're not going to be.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying don't be provocative and don't push, but you have to be doing it, I think, in the right way to bring people with you.
So is it fair then to say sometimes community, conversation, people lead, and you keep pace or add to?
I think you're ahead of pace.
And then other times you go ahead of pace. Okay.
Yeah, I think you're ahead of pace,
Okay,
but
so
if you get
so
too far ahead, you're going to
You're
be
going to be too far.
too far ahead.
Okay.
And so as we think about the spaces, I mean, our spaces were designed and obviously structured in a certain way. They're not particularly welcoming to incredibly diverse groups, and so we're doing a lot of thinking about how do we make our spaces more welcoming, and our streets and gardens and et cetera, more welcoming to more diverse people. How do we make our programming? So
I'm glad you brought that up, because that is another point I wanted to make. So I do some facilitation work with the city of Norfolk. There's an area, if you aren't familiar with Norfolk, called St. Paul's, which is directly outside of downtown Norfolk. It is about 20 acres, literally right outside downtown. And it is the home currently of 3 public housing communities. And those public housing communities are coming down, and they're going to be replaced with affordable housing, public housing, and market rate housing, along with many other things. Mm-hmm. The area floods horribly. It was built on, they built over top of a creek, and so they've decided they're going to daylight the creek and create resiliency ponds and parks and areas. And so there's been a lot of thought behind what kinds of public spaces need to be created in this new community. Right. And one of the things that has been very, very important is the fact that there have been many efforts to make sure that the current community's voice is heard and is respected and is a part of helping them to design what will work going forward. I'm wondering, as you look at your individual institutions, or even more so than your individual institutions, the institutions you represent, meaning museums and libraries and all, is that kind of thinking, are you engaging people who either don't currently utilize your space or utilize your space in a very limited or specific way? Are you somehow engaging them to find out what needs to happen in the future? Because you're not going to stay static. None of these institutions are static, right?
I think we are having conversations, we are listening, but I also think it's challenging because people have a very stereotypical idea of what a public library is. So it's hard for them to imagine the library radically changing. So you kind of have to bring ideas forward. I go back to that hybrid children's museum, children's library that we've created, because because that came from our experiences having programs where we saw how excited people were to bring their children to enrichment programs. Everybody wants their children to have a better life, you know, and how happy families were and multi-generations were to do something hands-on together and learn. And so it kind of was born out of us observing how the public wanted to use the library or was using the library and trying to build on that. So I think it's conversations plus really thinking about what's relevant now. I mean, people like the idea of a lot of books, but they don't necessarily come for the books, just for the books anymore. You know, they really need more. And we really are struggling in this library by not having enough people space. We have the collections, but there's not enough seating. And one thing I wanted to follow up with when we're talking about all the different people in the library coexisting is that a lot of people choose to come and sit here and be here. Every table and chair will be full in this library every day. And they could be at home, but they don't want to be at home, a lot of people. They would rather be around other people, even if in that moment they're not actively engaging. They like that feeling of community. They like being around other humans. They need that, and they choose to come here and be together. And you know, we need a lot more places for them to do that.
Christy, what happens if you listen to the marginalized folks, for lack of a better term, and what they need or what they say they might want as you're planning, you know, for the future, and then you're listening to your donors, and they want something else?
So this has always been an issue for me, right? Because for me, my work has always been centered on the public. And always, I mean, even before there was a thing for that, I was like, what do people need? And I've been watching how people were reacting. What do they need? How can I feed that need, even if they don't know what they want? It's like, what is a need that I am seeing? And subsequently, what ends up happening is that, you know, by listening to those other voices, it helps me think about a new way to meet a need. And so, and recognizing that there are a lot of different things in the toolbox. For example, when I was at the American Civil War Museum and we were planning for our new facility and our new exhibitions, I knew off the bat that I did not want the exhibition to be traditional. And by that, I meant I made it very clear to the exhibit designers I didn't want to see any beige, oxblood red, blue, like the blue you're sitting in. I didn't want to see any of those colors in any design. And then we invited in teachers and, you know, we just invited in a bunch of different people at different times and showed them a series of images, because I had an instinct about something, but I wasn't really sure. And it changed how we ended up doing it. And that was, there was some new technique that was taking place with colorized images. And we're not talking Ted Turner here, right? We're talking about really like high-end colorization, computer digital photography with black and white from the Civil War era. And I put up these images. I was personally drawn to them, but I was like, are other people going to be drawn to this? Are they going to have an issue with it? And intellectually, there were some people like, oh, don't do that. But what made us decide to do it was when the teachers told us, you know, every time we go to a museum or what have you, and the kids see a black and white photograph or image, they immediately disconnect because they think it happened so long ago and it's not relevant. And that was like the ding, ding, ding moment. Like, okay, well, we're gonna include both. And when we really wanna highlight a face or a place or a person, we're going to do that. And we specifically did that with the unexpected people of color in the Civil War that most folks had never seen these images before or knew what they were. So we had images of Native Americans, we had Cherokee and Creek, Apache even, that were in our photographic collection of Native peoples who had participated in the American Civil War. We had images of Chinese Americans who had served in the United States Army. We had all of these images that most people, again, had never, but when we colorized it and we blew them up and we, kind of led in certain section, the whole visual language of that exhibit was forever changed just by that decision. And it was probably the best decision we ever made. And I am proud to say that they still are drawing an incredible, and let me tell you, the Civil War is something that people of color don't deal with, or didn't deal with before us. And that museum still, last communication that I had with the team there, about 30% of the audience going into the American Civil War Museum now are people of color, because they see themselves in the story like they never did before. It wasn't just, black people were slaves sitting off to the side, and this was just white Southerners and white Northerners. When they can visually see their presence, it made a huge difference, and we were able to tell the story. So for me, that's, it's a relationship with the audience, even if that audience doesn't know, again, what they want. If you're paying attention, if you're really leading and paying attention, you begin to see what people need, right? And you can build from that.
Same question to you, Cliff. You listen to the people who say, this is what we want from CW, but your donors say,
Well, as I pointed out, the conflict is not actually that stark for us at this point. I mean, an example, though, of a project that we're doing, and people are most familiar with it, I was on the site today, is obviously the archaeology on First Baptist Church. Everything we do there is being done by what the church wants us to do. Okay, so I was on site today. We're having a meeting in a couple weeks where we're going to talk about the 30 graves we found.
Yes.
What do we do? No, that's not our decision. Okay, that's a decision that needs to be made by the church. And
that's an evolution
community.
for you all, though, isn't it?
Well, I can't speak to what happened before I got here,
okay.
but
All right, fair
Christy
enough.
can actually do that.
Fair
much
enough.
better than me. But
Fair enough.
that said, I mean, so that's been a very collaborative process, and we're only doing what we're asked to do. Okay, now we raise some money and do the work, and but the church is very much guiding our activities. That said, and Christy's going to know who I'm talking about. There are certain donors that are not with us, and she and I have spoken about a specific one, and she knows, she's nodding, so she knows who it is, and that's okay. That's okay.
Because sometimes you have to be willing to leave some folks behind. Huh?
Yeah,
Exactly.
And
In order to
And that's
okay.
not an easy thing to do. I
Right.
mean, sometimes it's, and I know that peers in smaller institutions who may not have the kind of resources that our organizations do, to tell a donor no, or no thank you, we don't need your money if that's the caveat with your money, that's a scary thing to do in some cases. And it's, like I said, it's that really interesting way that our institutions have been set up. But at the end of the day, believe it or not, people will replace you.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll replace it. I mean, God knows. I mean, when we did the merger and created the American Civil War Museum, and we planned to lose 40% of our donors.
Wow.
We said 40% of our donors are going to go away. But all we needed was that one donor who loved exactly what we were trying to do.
And
he said, I'll fill in the gaps. I'll fill in the gap for a few years so that you guys can build.
Yeah.
And
I mean, he was remarkable. I gotta say. I mean, this man was like, how much of a deficit do you think that's going to create on an annual basis? Okay, I got you. And that's the thing. If you're doing really good work and you have people who are standing in your corner, they're going to fill in that space, as Cliff has found, and as we are finding that you can do that. And here's the other thing. Because the work is so good, the audiences begin to come. The change begins to come. And so when a donor wants their money to go to good cause, they want it, and when they see that the work is having an impact, they're more willing to open that wallet even bigger.
right.
In a
So,
lot of cases.
And just to build on that, we haven't released a number, so I'm not going to, because
Right.
Amy will get mad at me. But we had our best fundraising year ever last year, and it wasn't even close.
Wow.
Not even close. We blew away every record we've ever had from a fundraising standpoint. Because if you do good work,
What was the big change that made that happen?
I'm coming to you. Just hang on. I know. I was looking at my watch going, okay,
Yeah.
I'm in trouble. Andrew's going to yell at me because we got to get to the audience. I
Yeah.
do want to ask you all one last question
sure.
before we take the audience question. Well, I tell you what. I'll save that to wrap up.
Okay.
Now, what was your question?
What made the big change for this year? Why did people open their wallets?
Why do people open their wallets, Cliff?
we have focused on telling, building on the success of others, making sure we continue to broaden the story. A lot of that work has been done in partnership with William and Mary here. The Bray School, the First Baptist work has been done. Our theater program, many of the roots which go back to the 1990s, was recognized as one of the top 10 places in the world for theater here. So we are receiving national recognition for the work that's being done right here in this little city. And so what we have seen as the profile of our work has elevated nationally, we are seeing significantly stronger donor support nationally for our work. So.
Okay. Yes. You want to take the mic back?
Yes.
Just a second.
Just so we
can
can
barely-
have a
It's
have a
hard to
good,
hear from
clean
up here.
record here.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to something Ms. Coleman said about the alcoholism. I had an idea a few years ago that it would be fantastic if there was a conference center, research center at Colonial Williamsburg for human trafficking and slavery. And that's a way I should think that you open up to a lot of people, research and certainly donations and contributions and grants. I don't know if there's...
So just another way to expand the community conversation, to bring more people in to get things going.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Other
Well,
questions?
thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Yes.
Just an observation, but when, I'm a frequent attendee of the library, multiple times a week, and when there were free copies, you would be amazed at the cross-section of people
When they were free
in here.
photocopies.
And I wish that, I mean, if we want to continue to make the library even better, if we could have maybe 4 free copies a person, because some people just won't ask to bypass now that it's back to being paying. Most of us, don't mind the 10 cents, of course. But there were so many people here before that were obviously not able to do that. And I just wish there was a way that we could keep that going.
That's
Betsy?
interesting that you said that. We will still do free copies for people, but they may not know that we will do free copies for people. And we are, that's good to know because we have been working really hard on breaking down barriers. We did away with overdue fines permanently this year. And the jurisdictions went along with us. They were a little surprised because it's a revenue stream. And we've been eliminating barriers wherever we can. But that's an interesting one to reconsider. So thank you.
Let me ask you, audience members, if you, do you feel safer to hold difficult conversations in public spaces like the library or like a museum or conversations like this forum this evening? In other words, do you think that because we have those kinds of spaces, that is the place, those are the places to go to have the difficult conversations that we need to be having here in our country right now? Or should they just be for what they do? Anybody? Yes, public spaces? Yes, ma'am.
You're comfortable. It's a community that you're used to, and so the comfort level is there to begin conversations, I would think.
Do you engage? When you go to these places, do you engage other strangers as you're talking, even if it's just to say, "Hey, did you see this, or have you read this book, or
I will definitely say yes. I was at the library one day waiting my turn, and there was a mother and a young child. And I loved seeing this young child just dancing and so excited. And the librarian said, "Oh, you've got some books." And he goes, "I've got the big ones. I've got the really big ones." And I had to say to the mother, "Your child is darling," and I love the enthusiasm. So I do think that places that you're comfortable in do, that I'll never see her again, but I had to tell her. I had to tell her child was adorable. Because that's what you mean, right?
No, I'm looking for trying to figure out, as we try to have, we have some contentious things happening in our country right now. And one of the things that people have been saying is that we need to talk about it, and we need to talk about them in various ways and in various spaces. And so what I'm asking is, do you consider the library as an example, since we're sitting in the Williamsburg Regional Library, as a safe place to hold those types of conversations? Or should they stay in the background and not be a part of the town square, so to speak?
I think that we are fortunate to have the Williamsburg Regional Library system. I've lived here now for a little bit over 5 years, and I've been to both places for things where people were discussing and seemed to be comfortable. Mm-hmm. The one point I want to make is I'm a Midwesterner who married somebody going into the military. So we got here in the early 80s to Langley. And in Hampton, at one point, they decided, it was done some research, and they would have a Unity Commission. But everything the Unity Commission did, the places we met, the kinds of things we did, were all one way or another connected with the city. And in the time I've been gone, which now is 30-some years, it has loosened up. It's a much different organization than what it was. But when we first went to Hampton, I'd worked in universities. We went there in August. It was Labor Day. We were at Mill Point Park, and there were all these students around. And I said, is there a college? I mean, at that point, I hadn't done a whole lot of research on Hampton. Is there a college here? I applied for a job there and got it. Now, I was one of probably a dozen non-African American employees on that campus. Mm-hmm. This was the mid-80s. And it's not easy to be in that situation with everyone who's there. I mean, I got it from students, I got it from other employees. The best one was when I got it from parents who, well, what do you do here? And I'm dealing with incoming freshmen. And so I think it was the best experience of my life. Don't get me wrong. But it was a learning experience because I had never been in a minority. My husband was in the military when a lot of people didn't think we should be involved in a war. We made it through that. But if you haven't done something difficult, it's not easy, I don't believe, to come to even a situation like this and be comfortable interacting. It takes a while, and it took, those 3 years on campus were the best years of my life.
Thank you for sharing that.
I was going to say, about 5 years ago, there was a program that the library held in conjunction with William and Mary about each of the Bill of Rights. So January was the First Amendment, February was the Second Amendment, whatever. And they had a presentation, and then they would have law professor or law, they would have different third-year law students explain what the precedents were and what was going to be decided for the Supreme Court. And then they had discussion groups. I found that so fascinating to attend. And I would love to see those kinds of things continue at the library.
I will say, I think we really need to practice talking about hard things. I don't think it's easy to do. And I think that's one of the things that William and Mary is trying to do with this democracy initiative, is give our students the tools to have hard conversations. And so I just thought I would plug the Aspen Institute, which is the Better Arguments Project, which I think is a really powerful framework about how you practice having hard conversations. And I wonder if, as part of the democracy initiative, and as we get into the book until and after Eric Kleinenberg leaves, if we would be really wise as a community to actually practice some of the things that Aspen Institute says. It says, first thing you have to do is you have to take winning off the table. Then you have to prioritize relationships and listen passionately. I think sometimes people think when you're arguing, you have to raise your voice, you have to make a point, and you have to win. But really, it's about listening to people who bring a whole different perspective to the conversation. And then you have to pay attention to context, you have to embrace vulnerability, and then you have to be open to transformation. And I think if we could all get together and we could bring people together, like you said, not the same people, but really go out and find people that think differently about issues and bring them together. That's what the Better Aspen Institute does, is they bring communities together around really charged, hard topics, and they put them around a table and they teach you how to do this work. And I think that would be a really interesting and helpful thing for any community to do. So I mean, I hope we can get to the point where we can do that.
So the public spaces are there, the ability to have those conversations are there. You're positing that we need to learn how to have those conversations.
I do. I mean, I think that's one of the things that libraries can do, is we can put on programs like this to talk about the tools and the frameworks, but it's more than just, it doesn't just happen. I think you have to want to be a part of it, and you have to show up and be ready to do it. And so I guess I just wanted to say, I mean, college is the time where you come to be transformed. I think you are open-minded. I think you do share, you come into a dorm situation, your roommate's different than you were raised in a different place, and it is a place for people to figure out who they are. And so William and Mary's a little bit in a bubble, but I do think it's really about teaching our students when they come here how to make the most of those years so that they can learn how to have a better argument and how to express themselves. But more importantly, how to listen to people who think differently and who were raised differently. So.
Let me ask, go ahead.
We have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, and then we'll come down here.
Well,
Yes.
I would just want to go back to your question about the safe space. And that I think that the library is one of the few places where it's an unspoken rule that we should still maintain a bit of civility when we come to speak. And certainly the programming can lead us that direction to have those conversations, or it can just be a matter of how we interact with each other. I no longer see that when I go to the grocery store. I don't see that in the school board meetings at all, even though I think school boards have tried very hard to establish protocols to help that happen. That seems to have been left by the wayside. In our governmental meetings, it seems to be completely divided into group factions that want specific things, and usually it has to do with money. So the library is the only place where we have that unspoken rule that we should still be nice to each other. We have to show our faces, unlike in the last word, where I think should be obliterated, because if we don't say we say something anonymously, we're not responsible for it, then we shouldn't be saying it. I just wanted to say that in regards to, I think, civility, the expectations that we should talk in a civilized manner should be held more. We should all be held accountable for that. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. This gentleman had a.
Yeah, that's commenting on the safe space also. What I really love about the library is, like, there's no agenda, right? You're not trying to. You don't come to the library. You can come to the library and be free of who you are, right? It's safe to express or read about stuff you don't understand, on your private time or in groups or whatever. But the fact that you can come here and you're not trying to be changed, it's a free place to come and change freely, right, from the inside. And there's no agenda to corrupt your process through those motions, right? That's
so nobody in the library is telling you what to think. You're free to think what you want.
There's
to do what you want.
To do what you want.
Okay. This person?
We actually have some organizations. We have the Village, we have All Together in Williamsburg that are trying to do those things, and I would love to see more of us come together in that. I would love to see more people here tonight. I was shocked. I came early thinking I would be sure and get a seat. And you all have done a beautiful job, and I'm so proud to be here, and I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you very much. We are still dealing with a pandemic, so we understand. But we do understand that. I want, for the sake of time, because I promised I would get us out of here on time, and we're a little bit over, but I want to ask you all, for each of your institutions, as you're thinking about the conversation we've had, as you're thinking about your institution being a palace for the people, is there anything exciting, new, different you want to tell us for our audience to expect that's coming up, that you're thinking about doing? Give you a moment to brag on your institution for a moment. Cliff, let's start with you this time.
Okay. So a lot of our work right now is focused on 2026. 2026 is, of course, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It's also the 100th anniversary of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. So we've got our centennial and the nation's 250th in the same year. As we approach that work, we want to make sure that it is a commemoration for everybody. And so we use this opportunity to illuminate and tell a complete history of our nation's founding. In telling that history, use it as an opportunity to create the spaces to have some of these difficult conversations that you're having. We're doing that work today, but as the nation's spotlight naturally turns to our little city, I think we're going to have a tremendous opportunity to magnify our efforts. Because we're also going to be having the 250th anniversary of the founding of First Baptist Church, which is the nation's oldest black church here, the 250th anniversary of the closing of the Bray School, which is the first school educating black children. Also get a plug, the 250th anniversary of the founding of Phi Beta Kappa will also occur in 2026. And I can go on and on. But there's a lot of stuff that's going to be happening in this little community over the next few years. And so how do we use those important anniversaries to make sure we bring people together?
And I will say, in full disclosure, I am a board member of the Let Freedom Ring Foundation, which is very much involved in the work that Colonial Williamsburg and the church are doing and all of that work. So thank you for bringing that project front and center.
It's a privilege.
We really appreciate that. Carrie, what do you want to tell us?
Well, I was thinking, we're citizens of our country. We're also citizens of the world. One of the really interesting events that happens every spring is the Global Film Festival at William and Mary. And we bring together filmmakers and storytellers who are working in film and media, television, to campus. It usually happens in February. This year it's transitioning to the Ampersand International Arts Festival. It's going to be April 6th through 10th. It is a time where the library hosts workshops. We bring back alumni. We welcome our students to be mentored by those alumni and for people in the community to come and be a part of that. We have international films, the directors of those films, the actors of those films, and it's going to be an exciting time. So we'd love to see people from the community come and join us for those activities.
Okay, that's in April.
That's
All
in
right.
April, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, Eric Kleinenberg, we're excited about him.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Betsy.
I think we're really excited to be building on these collaborations. The collaboration with William and Mary Libraries has been terrific. This is our third One Book, One Community read. I think each time we've tried to pick a book that was really meaningful about what was happening in our country and relevant. We did Stamped, we did Tommy Orange the year before. And the college has been a terrific partner, and a terrific partner they're always willing to come over and have programming. And when you have a college professor leading a conversation, it's wonderful because they're so artful in terms of being able to establish a civil dialogue and to be able to set the expectations. We're hoping to have a new building in the next few years. We've been working with elected officials. As much as we all love this library, we really need spaces that people can collaborate, they can create, they can come together and connect in new ways.
Will there be some way for the public to give you feedback or what they think would be important to include in this new building?
That is really an important part of designing a public library, is because you have to have the community buy-in, and that buy-in comes from being heard and feeling like what they need and want is going to be reflected in the
So this
building.
audience should expect to hear something from you at some point as you guys go through
And this
this.
audience should tell their elected officials how important this library is and that we need a new building. So yes. But we're working hard because we want to be relevant and we want to make a difference. And we know that society is changing, and we know that that we can't just rest on the laurels of what libraries have always been, that we've got to evolve and we've got to do powerful outreach, and we've got to bring everybody along with us. So
great. Ms. Coleman.
Yeah, I mean, like Cliff, we're preparing for 2026, and for us, 2031 for the 250th of the Battle of Yorktown. But in the subsequent years, it really is about transitioning the organization from being so insular. JYF has been a part of the Williamsburg community for a long time, but have we really? And so it's really looking at how we're able to now go out and really engage in ways that we really haven't fully in our immediate community as well around the state. I mean, I gotta say though, I mean, the foundation has done an extraordinary job with its public education sector. For many, many years, Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation has been the leading source of in-classroom support, going out to roughly 96,000 children where, our people are in classrooms all over the Commonwealth. We welcome over 200,000 children on site. And because it's, it's become it's the fourth grade trip, right? Everybody had to take the fourth grade trip to Jamestown. So my predecessors did a fantastic job of making sure that fourth grade trip to Jamestown. Well, outside of that and learning how to make your little stick fort, I mean, once you get out of the fourth grade, then what happens to you? And so we are working really hard on that. So one of the more immediate projects that we're working on is actually the first time we've done an exhibition across both locations, a story across both locations. And we have an exhibition that it opens November 5th. The 5th of November, you gotta remember the 5th of November, right? If you know what that is, right? And it's called Reign and Rebellion. And it looks at the impact, not only in the colonization of the Stuart family, the crown, the British monarchies, and their policies, their activities that would lead us to a Jamestown. And in that global time, because we tend to think of it, we don't realize just how global colonization was and what was happening. Even on these shores that the Spanish and French were here first, they just didn't last long, right? In addition to, obviously, the native nations that were here. So we're reframing all of the work that we're doing around these conversations with Reign and Rebellion. And then, just think of it as the monarchy that won and lost America. And how did they do that? And then what legacies that monarchy leave as we were establishing a new nation and new behaviors? And there are some of those things that are definitely play out in the early period and then at the birth of a new nation. So Reign and Rebellion, November 5th, at the Jamestown Settlement and the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, our panel, give them a big round of applause. So I must say that there are several activities going on this month surrounding the book Palaces for the People by Eric Kleinenberg. And Mr. Kleinenberg will be here on February the 24th at 6:30 p.m. Right here. And you can find the full schedule at WHRO.org. And I would like to also say that I appreciate being a part. This is the second One Book, One Community conversation that I've been involved in. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all and to have engaged in this conversation today. And I want to also thank you all for coming. I want to invite you to tune in to Another View tomorrow at noon on 89.5 WHRV FM. That is your NPR station for Eastern Virginia. And we're going to be talking about the challenges and the triumphs of being an African-American parent raising a child with autism. And so it's a different kind of conversation for us, but I think it will be something that will be uplifting and important for everyone to hear. So I hope that you all have a safe trip home, that you stay positive, that you test negative, and good night.
That was good.
Steal that one, that was great.